And we're going to stop this as soon as that little thing stops. There we go. And let me share my screen here. Okay. Now to start off our kind of our program of discussion about minor orders, I thought it might be nice to everybody kind of sit back, and I'm going to go through a series of just some of the early readings in Pseudo-Dionysius' book of his ecclesiastical hierarchy. As you can tell, this is it's a well-worn book by me, and I think that as far as like Platonic Christianity, mystical Christianity, I think Pseudo-Dionysius is a must-read. So his work on ecclesiastical hierarchy was done after his work on celestial hierarchy. So in celestial hierarchy, he goes through the various levels of angels with their powers and their qualities. So it's kind of important that he's already made a start on the idea of ascent. So then he starts bringing in the ecclesiastical as like the earthly realm to bolster up the lower end. Let's just sit back, and I think some of these have some really nice little clues in them. Let me move you guys aside so I can see. Most sacred of sacred ones. Our hierarchy consists of an inspired divine and divinely worked understanding, activity, and perfection. With the aid of the transcendent and most sacred scriptures, I must demonstrate this to those who have been initiated in the sacraments of the sacred mystagogy by the hierarchies of mysteries and traditions. Let your respect for the things of the hidden God be shown in the knowledge that comes from the intellect and the unseen. Keep these things of God unshared and undefiled by the uninitiated. And let your sharing of the sacred be sacred things. Let it be the way of sacred enlightenment for sacred men and women only. And indeed, the word of God teaches those of us who are its disciples that this is the fashion. Through more clearly and more intellectually, Jesus enlightens our blessed superiors. Jesus who is transcendent mind, utterly divine mind, who is the source being of all, underlining all hierarchy, all sanctification, all workings of God, who is the ultimate divine power. He assimilates them as much as they are able to his own light. As for us, with the yearning for beauty, which rises us upward and which is raised up to him, he pulls together all our many differences. He makes our life, disposition, and activity of something one and divine. And he bestows on us the power appropriate to sacred priesthood. Approaching, therefore, the holy activity of sacred office, we come closer to those beings who are superior to us. We imitate as much as we can their abiding, unwavering, and sacred constancy. And we thereby look up to the blessed and divine and ultimately divine ray of Jesus himself. And then secretly beheld whatever can be seen, enlightened by the knowledge of what we have seen, we shall then be able to be consecrated and consecrators of this mysterious understanding. Formed of light, initiates in God's work, we shall be perfected and bring about perfection. Of course, as I've already said, those beings and those orders which are superior to us are also incorporeal. Their hierarchy belongs to the domain of the conceptual and something out of this world. We see our human hierarchy, on the other hand, as nature allows, polarized in the great variety of perceptible symbols lifting upwards. Hierarchically, until we are brought as far as we can to the unity of divinization. The heavenly beings, because of their intelligence, have their own perceptive concepts of God. For us, on the other hand, it is by way of perceptible things that we are lifted as far as we can to contemplation of what is divine. And actually, it is the same one whom all beings desire, but they do not participate in the same way in this one and same being, and rather share the divine portion, each to accordance and merit. We have a venerable sacred tradition that asserts that every hierarchy is a complete expression of sacred elements comprised within. It is the total of all sacred that constitutes. Our own hierarchy is therefore said to embrace every one of these sacred constituents. And thanks to this divine hierarch, will upon his consecration, will attend the most sacred duties. Indeed, this is why he is called the hierarch. And indeed, if you talk about hierarchy, you're referring to the effect of the arrangements of all sacred realities. Talk of hierarch, and one is referring to a wholly inspired man or woman. Someone who understands all sacred knowledge, in whom an entire hierarchy is completely perfected and known. And the source of this hierarchy is the fountain of life, the being of goodness, the one cause of everything, namely the Trinity, which in goodness bestows being and well-being on everything. Now this blessed deity, which transcends everything, and which is one, and also triune, has resolved, and for reasons unclear to us, but obvious to itself, to ensure the salvation of all rational beings, both ourselves and those beings who are our superiors. And this can only happen in the divinization of the saved. And divinization consists of being as much as possible like and in union with God. some very Buddhist elements in some of this. So I thought, say we have any comments before we go on, and I'll just want to go through the holy orders and we could talk.
Yeah, Pamela, good evening. Steve, Ina, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I know what the problem is now. Anyway, I have a question. No, just an observation. All salvation of all rational beings and superior beings. Do you have a definition of who the superior?
I think the superior beings he's referring to is the angelic hierarchy, yeah, the celestial hierarchy, as well as Jesus. And I think also in some of his writings, he leaves it open as far as where some of the apostles or prophets stand on all of this, of whether or not they're possibly above even the humans that are kind of working on perfection. I think Dionysius also kind of comes from the mentality, as we see in St. Paul, where humanity itself has levels, that you have the hylic level, the psychic, and the pneuma in this sort of three-tier fashion. And where the writings of Dionysius, like the writings of a lot of the Gnostics, really being geared toward that of the psychic and the pneuma, and not worrying too much about trying to recruit the hylic. So there is a little bit of elitism, I think, in all the Platonic, all the Platonists rather, sort of workings.
All rational beings.
And there is yes. So rational beings excludes a lot of humans as well.
Yeah, everything goes down to, first of all, definitions. Otherwise, we can't communicate properly without having a definition. And so, you know, I question rational beings. Maybe it's meant rational beings. I don't know if we can class any animal as a rational being. So maybe that eliminates anything below the human race if we can consider ourselves to be rational.
Yeah. I think it's very hard to find in a lot of the early Christian writings much about the state of animals. You know, I know Pythagoras and some of the other, Greek, pagan Greek authors would talk about the level of animals within the nature and the human hierarchy. But it's hard to find any of the Christian.
Yeah, probably more Hindu and more Buddhist.
More Hindu and Buddhist, yeah. Well, I thought we'd go through these very quickly. So I probably should have made a list on the side, but yes. The first of the minor orders, of course, we're divided between the minor orders and the major orders. The major orders start at the level of the subdeacon, usually. So the first of the minor orders is the cleric, which is really a introduction into the ecclesiastical community. And it's almost in like the mainstream churches, this would be almost at the level of, like, my mother belonged to something called Altar Guild when for while I was growing up. And so they were, allowed to kind of do a lot of the rank and file work around the church, but no real teaching or no real sort of sacramental. Yes. And I think in all the groups I've come across where they use the cleric, I know Steve, you had sent one of the old Catholic. And the Old Catholic gave a definition of it. We might as well use theirs. This is the first chronologically minor order. Clerics were historically asked to keep themselves clean and tidy, to act in a respectable manner, and to become fellow workers for God. After a period of time in this ecclesiastical setting, they were admitted to doorkeepers. It says, we ask today to practice and get used to working and serving in the ministerial environment, and to think like a disciple of Christ, and to behave like a servant, patiently and effectively. Try to train emotions as well as the physical body in preparation for life as a minister, and learn to control manner, character of your serving to be effective. I actually try to put these into the slides, but they're locked down. And
yeah, Pam, I don't know. I mean, from an esoteric point of view, do you remember I was mapping them out on the on a pentagram, and and one of the there's like a nice correspondence with the element of earth. If you know, as the first move in the lesser pentagram banishing ritual, the first movement downwards is to the element of earth, and you can kind of see that as corresponding to the body, and you know, and I think it will kind of come out, in my perspective at least, that these minor orders together kind of create almost like a curriculum.
Yeah, they do. And one of the things I want to go through later is talking about curriculum, because I was thinking a lot about this in the past, and there had been a curriculum within the EGA called the Athena Theologica. But in the 20 years plus I'd been associated with the church, there are multiple efforts to update that. They have always run into problems, and we could talk about that later. But I've had some ideas on this. Okay, the next letter is that of the. Now I noticed that actually my slides are out of order because it should be the doorkeeper. Here we go. The next point is or order is that of the doorkeeper, which really amounts to an usher in mainstream churches. And part of the doorkeeper, one of the ideas that images that comes to me as a doorkeeper is actually the major role that's discussed in the alchemical wedding. It has a role in there, in the Rosicrucian work. And I'm often reminded of in ancient Egypt, the doorkeeper role, or the protector of the role, was held by Anubis. And the priests of Anubis would stand outside the temples and chant to keep the temple safe, to keep the temples whole. And I thought that was such a kind of appropriate, beautiful sort of setting. So part of the doorkeepers, very similar to things we did a couple weeks ago it's about creating the sort of sacred space and maintaining the sacred space. As ushers, it's a lot about conducting. The roles are to conduct people in and also to make sure that nobody comes to disturb the churches, which was an issue when I was living in the South Side Chicago, but that's another thing. And it's also about maintaining the sacredness and the safety of the ceremony. I think Steve and I had talked about it's similar to the roles of the Tyler, similar to the roles of the guardians within some of the within Masonic work.
Pamela, do you on the chanting to keep the space holy? Do you know what the chant would be? Do you have an English translation?
I'd have to dig around in that. I would think it would probably be in honor of whatever gods or goddesses were of the temple.
Yeah, I'd imagine that it would vary on the context, you know, whether depending on, it might be like something, even in a Christian context, it might be something like Kyrie eleison, or you know, it might be the names of Allah if it was in an Islamic one. I think it's going to vary on the setting and what the congregants would hold as being sacred to them, Warren, I'd guess.
Yeah, I can believe that, Steve. I mean, the chanting in Buddhism is for a few reasons. One is obviously to get the mind set in that certain way, the vibrations at the right sort of level. It's all to do with vibrations, as Tesla said. And it's very interesting to say what you just said. The gatekeeper, the doorkeeper, the porter. You can overlook him very easy, but when you bring out these points, everybody's position is valuable. It reminds me of that interview they did on the Apollo 11 space program, and some TV crew went round Houston, and you notice I say Houston correctly, like the American. Okay, and he went round there, and he came up across this guy who was a cleaner, an office cleaner, empty the bins. And he said, "What do you do?" He says, "I keep the space program going." "Well, how do you do that?" I'm an office cleaner." "Well, how can you do that?" He said, "Well, if I don't clean that office, they can't work." You know, he's got a point. So everybody's important in this setup. And when you go deeper into what this doorkeeper does, you know, it becomes, you know, you begin to understand the depth of the value of this guy. What
and
I
also,
like, Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say, and it also why it's important to go through these minor orders, because without understanding what the doorkeeper does as a way of creating that space and maintaining the space, none of the higher orders would work. That if you don't get this step right, you know, if you can't create a sacred space and maintain a sacred space, even within your own shell in your own space, let alone affecting a congregation around you, you can't do the rest of the work. You know,
I'm wondering, Steve, you know, you mentioned something before. You did an analogy to some ritual. I forget what it was now, because I was just having my tea as well at the same time as watching and listening. But is the doorkeeper analogy there in that particular ritual that you refer to?
Well, I suppose certainly within within Freemasonry, there's the office of the Tyler, who is the one who ensures that the temple is secure before you begin the ritual. So their job is to say, is everyone here who's supposed to be here? Are the people who here, do they know why they're here? Are they here for the same reason? So there's like an orientation towards sacred space. And I think most rituals also, there's like a sorting process, you know, that most would have some sort of gathering beforehand to make sure that all the people who are there know why they're there, and that the people who aren't there for the right reasons, or they're just hangers on, are really kind of scrutinized. And I've I remember going to a pagan ritual 25 years ago, and someone asked me really directly, why are you here today? And, and I thought, that's good. It's good that someone asks that question so that well, for your own safety and for the safety of the group, so that, that the person isn't kind of scared or freaked out, but equally that the group and its privacy is protected.
Yeah, and some rites I've been to, and certainly it happens later on in the Masonic opening, but part of the Masonic opening, and I know they do this immediately in Martinism, is the going through and the checking of the passwords, which is that same sort of thing of like ensuring that the people, that you've got the right people there. In some of the older works too, they talk about when they separate out the catechumes, the people who are just trying to learn about the Christian work, and the non-believers, or what they call the possessed, from the real Christians, or from the hearers or the elect. And there's this winnowing phase that happens as well.
That is a Manichaean expression, Pamela, the elect.
Yeah.
It crops up a lot in Manichaeism. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of theirs, and the elect, very similar to the Cathars, would use the term the perfecta.
Yeah.
Perfect in there. So this is a very important role. And I think there's a lot there, as we talked about when we were talking about sacred space. There's a lot that could be done.
And I think, Pam, if you're extending that and thinking about the training of an individual who's undertaking that grade, there's a lot in terms of their own meditation practice, and how they're developing internally, so that these things have meaning because they're parallel in the life of the person undertaking them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where it's funny. When I was preparing for this, and Steve and I had a little bit of a chat. One of the books that one of the reference Steve has sent me was one from John Michael Greer, and this Gnostic Celtic, their Gnostic Celtic Church, which is actually the Gnostic kind of arm, or their Christian arm of the American Druid order. And I actually, it's funny that you had mentioned them, because I had actually picked this up because they had a solstice rituals that I had used last week. But that had me thinking about some of these ideas and about the defining space. And I think that's why I put the quarters in here, because that's often a definition as well. Now, the lector is typically rather kind of tossed out as being the reader. Conventional church is common for a regular church member to read a collect, or to read the epistles or Old Testament work. But I think this is something that should be expanded in Gnosticism, in the Gnostic Church, because we do have chanting and intonations. And sometimes we run into things where the congregation too gets involved with the intonation of the sacred vowels, as well as barbarous names. And these are all a bit of a science, in themselves. And while we have some of them in a few of our ritual, in a few of our the Vespers, or in some of the sacred, some of the special ceremonies, in the Nag Hammadi, these are used quite a bit. And I know in my daily rituals, I make use of the sacred vowels.
The sacred vowels brings to mind, if you just give me a moment, I've got a book I've been reading today. The 2 books I think you recommended. First of all, Pamela, Steve, you recommended this.
Oh yeah, yes,
South
that's
Wales. Okay. It's unfortunate. It's over the hills from here, South
okay.
Wales.
I know it's off out of your territory.
I would probably, when I get a chance, I will probably venture down that way anyway. But the other one is this one.
Okay.
Now,
Oh, that's interesting.
very interesting, written by a lady back in the 60s, and I think women then were careful about making their identity known as a female in these areas. You know, I mean, it wasn't the same with Professor, what's her name on the Gnostic Gospels?
Oh yeah, Elaine Pagel.
Yeah, she wasn't.
Yeah, but she was later. She was writing in the 70s where things had changed.
Yes. Yes, but this one is interesting because you mentioned sacred vowels. Here we are, because, and Stephen, you will know this because it's very fascinating, this book, because words are magic. When you call, I mean, I've read it in other Gnostic documentation, you say a word, you call a name, it's a magic name.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, it goes into the alphabet here, certain words, symbols, and it's very well referenced. And it's Manichaean. A lot of it is Manichaean. Nazarene Church rite and ritual, basically explaining a handshake, a hand clasp, they call it. But it's the magic, the words are magic, they say. And really they are, because I'm having this discussion with myself, if you can see what I mean. In my profession, when I use words to define an engineering solution, these are my words. These are for my profession, that other engineers will know what I mean. They can visualize it. But you go to a lawyer, that's a different sort of solicitor, an attorney. That's a different type of English. We all have our different types of English, and these words are magic. How you use these words can have a real powerful effect on people. You know, a letter from a lawyer, you open that letter, and if it's got the right wording in there, you think, whoa, what do I do now? Now, if it's a lawyer who doesn't know how to use his words, you're not really bothered, you know. So this book here, it's only about 90 pages, 102 pages, £7 including postage, and it's by E.S. Drower, and it is, a lot of it is the father and mother alphabet. So let me show you this. Is that clear?
No, not to me. So let's see if I can get you bigger here. Yeah. Let me stop share for a minute, then we can see. Okay, now try it.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
It's better, but not all the way. Not with my old eyes. Here, let me.
It's the father, the mother, the alphabet.
Okay. Can I put you on speaker view? Okay, now try it. Didn't you have it on speaker view?
Speaker view. Is that better now? Maybe my camera.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit better. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, but it's because you mentioned the alphabet, the words, and fascinating. I think you recommended this book. I'm not too sure now.
No, I don't think I recommend that one.
Okay.
Because I don't have that one. But
I suppose what's also interesting, Pam, is that that the intellect is often associated with the element of air, and air is also related to speech. And I'm just thinking about, you know, what you've just said, Warren, about the word as an expression of the self, you know. So I think the reader in the lector grade, or the reader, you know, there's something about the developing of the intellectual faculties as a student, maybe, you know, kind of internalizing the ideas so that you can communicate them, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah, actually, let me give you a little part of the text in this book. It says, the word existed with God, says St. John the Evangelist, and was God. In Mandaic, it is the Mimra or the Malata, the spoken word. It is sometimes personified as a messenger who brings divine decisions to the Uthras, which is the spirit. So to pronounce or write a name is magic. It is to summon its owner. Steve, I think you've delved into those areas where over the years you've actually done that type of thing. Yeah. And the idea is a first stage of conception. Speaking aloud, i.e. the word, is the next, and it gives the idea shape and existence. The written word, therefore, has magical, mystical, and holy power, and the belief that it has reflects the awe in which the unlettered hold the lettered. And each letter in a word has, in itself, dynamic virtue, both numerical and magical. You know, that is a wonderful, that book really explains just that one word.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it goes back to in ancient Egypt and in the ancient Hebrew, in Kabbalah, where you don't really have the vowels are never written down. So you don't really, you can't be 100% sure of how this word gets pronounced. And part of that is to keep things, you know, keep things sacred.
Except one word, which is Yahweh. How do the Jewish people say Yahweh? Yahweh, without pronouncing the vowels. I can't do it. Yeah. Maybe you can. Yeah.
There's a you know, there's a book by Stephen Fiedler of Jesus, Son of God, where he goes through a lot of Greek gematria, but he also talks about he talks about, you know, how many of these ancient God names are all vowel sounds, you know, and of course you get Yahweh, Yeshua, is pretty much a vowel sound, Ewa, you know, and just adding to part of the, I think the part of the mystery of it all.
Yeah, it's like
Yove,
yeah. It's like the Indian word at the beginning, Om. You know, you don't. That's, you can do it without using any sort of pronunciation, just breath and your mouth movement.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's where, you know, we get into. There's a wonderful book on the 7 sacred vowels by, oh God, suddenly I've lost Jocelyn Goodwin, which I've always wanted to do a workshop on, you know, because there's so much there. And of course the vowels, there's musical tones that are associated with each of the vowels in different systems, as well as, you know, as well as the need to vibrate them. So it's not just the singing, it's, and this gets into the barbarous names as well. Really getting and having that sort of confidence, especially if you're doing this in a ceremonial thing with other people, to just get out there and really let go and vibrate these names, and to create an atmosphere by vibrating these names. I know Stephen Holler is one who I'd heard him, number of times vibrate barbarous names, but he was doing the consecration of a bishop, and it was like the whole big lodge is vibrating.
Really?
As he was hitting those tones.
Was that the famous lady bishop in Seattle?
No, this was when he was his consecrating Reverend Philip Garver in Chicago. He was out for one of those.
Wow. And do you remember what names he would use?
No, I can't remember.
Are they documented in any?
I think they are documented in the ordination rituals for the bishop. I'd have to look for it.
Ordination.
Yeah, the consecration of a bishop. I believe there are some sacred names that are used, the barbarous names. What's interesting about the barbarous names is that while they appear in the Gnostic texts, if you have chance to read the Greek magical papyri, which is another big collection of spells and chants and that, they use barbarous names. And Zosimus, in some of his work on alchemy, is using barbarous names. And many of these are the same. So that tells me that there was and part of the rule is, it comes up in the Gnostic stuff, and Zosimus in alchemy says, you don't change the barbarous names, that there must have been somewhat of a collective knowledge or a secret knowledge of what these names actually did that have been lost to us. And it's probably an opportunity for workshop group investigation and
I can see
exploration.
Steve has probably got a lot of knowledge on the area. Eh? Tell us, Steve.
I think, yeah. I mean, it's interesting if you look at magical alphabets, especially things like Enochian, which John Dee developed, and various groups develop their own magical alphabets. For example, in Wicca, there's an alphabet called Theban. And I suppose one way of looking at, there's a number of ways of looking at barbarous names. One of them is, as you say, Pam, that they represent something very secret that we don't know about. But another interesting way of viewing them is a bit like the Pentecostal experience of speaking in tongues, that they're a way of accessing the non-linear aspects of the self, because these words don't mean anything to us. So when you're saying them, you're breaking some of your own internal conditioning.
Yeah, and when they're really chanted and intoned well, and as Master KPK says, when you vibrate these things, and you vibrate so much that you feel everything within you is vibrating out. That you get the prickly sensation on the outward of your skin and everything as you vibrate these names.
Yeah, I mean, in Druidry, they also use kind of sacred Celtic words. I mean, one example is Arwen, which means inspiration. And a really lovely ritual that I've taken part in a couple of times is called a waterfall Golda, and Golda is a Norse word for vocal magic, and you chant like a word like Arwen, but people chant it at different times, so it's kind of overlapping. Pam, you've probably been in
I've
druidic
been in these where
rituals.
they did, yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely because you've got this kind of cascading sense of being enveloped by this kind of sound cloud.
Hmm.
I think, Steve, Pamela, I think you're quite right. This has inspired definitely another presentation. It's fascinating because there's many aspects to this. For example, a list of the barbarous names, the meanings, when to use them. And then there's the experiential of using these names in a ritual, which both of you have got experience of, I can hear, and how we use it. So I think there's a couple, at least two presentations on this. You know, the list of names, the meanings, and then the second one is when and how to use them.
Yeah, I had been thinking as I was putting this together and thinking about why we had, the issues with trying to update the Athena Theologica and the whole training process, was really kind of recognizing that, the these next four, from the porter with the sacred space, and then the lector here with the reading, and then the next two, we've got the working, it's the workings almost of a workshop. These are workshop things where you want to get people together, ideally would might be do in person or some other thing, so you can really kind of develop these skills, because they're needed for these grades, but they're also needed at something going on. And I could see time where we have workshops like this for people who are maybe becoming a lector, but also for other clergy who want a refresher, and maybe even bringing in, people who've got special knowledge of this outside of a group. But and I think that would be a better
Well,
method.
Pam, when I was reading that piece that I sent you from the Old Catholic Church, they were kind of saying, even if you become a bishop, you're still a reader. You know what I mean? So it's like all those other grades are nested within whichever one you take onwards. So like even a bishop never stops being a cleric, and so they need to keep connecting to whatever it is to be a cleric. So I think, yeah, it's interesting. In Wicca, there's a saying about the training that it takes a minimum of a year and a day, and in some ways, what's interesting about that is that it allows a full seasonal year to happen in whichever tradition you're working in, whether it's a Celtic one, a Christian calendar one, or whichever tradition. So there's something about going through a whole turning of that cycle, and both the darkness and light that come with the year, the calendar of the year, that allows the curriculum, whatever it is, to kind of be imbibed in a more kind of profound way.
Yeah, in Memphis Mizraim Masonry, there was that you needed to be at, especially the initial grades, you had to be at that level for a year, a year and at least to let these things really solidify within you and gel within you.
I wonder, Pamela, if Dana has got any experience on chanting or sacred vowels or barbarous names.
Dinah?
I think Dana is meditating on what we're saying.
She's been in a meditative mood tonight.
See, Dana's got secrets that it could be on the list here. Dana's secrets and meditation. I don't know.
Well, you can pop in here anytime and just make a sound if the rest of us get verbally assertive here.
You see, I can't remember when when I worked, I mentioned to you in Nigeria, Indonesia, they were the dark. There was the dark side, and I wish I'd taken notes, but I was just too young to take notes. I was 26, and I was there for work and an experience, and it was an experience. And I wish I could take notes of what they were doing, because I remember one occasion. Was in a place called Escravas, which is down the River Niger, and there was a village in the jungle there, and I think I told you this. You hear every Saturday on the drums, you know. So but the same that was explained to me why they did this every Saturday. But there was also other things which were going on, and they're using vibrations and words to invoke certain things to happen. You know, on the juju mainly, the black magic. But they were many were very Christian as well. So the paradox of this, it was quite amazing, interesting. You know, you've got the dark side as well as the light side. All they believe in both very, very much. And I wish I realised this at the time, because I would have been far more awake. I would imagine it would be more interesting. You know, that aspect of my experience.
I have a friend who is he's a Gnostic bishop, but he's also I'm not sure what the term is. They don't use the term babalo. Anyway, he's also a high priest in Congo, you know, where there's a lot of the magical stuff. And part of his reasoning is that he says that the Gnostic stuff is all good if you're high in sky, but that's not going to pay the rent next week. That he, as he saw, one of the things that Gnosticism was lacking was these sort of magical things to affect really your life here and now. And I know my first husband, who was also a Gnostic bishop and a Babalo, he would talk about that you're really having to have this sort of hands-on work.
I suppose what's interesting, if you look at the history of the occult revival, you have in the mid to late 19th century, you have the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a very male orientated, very classical, kind of intellectual, upwards, out of the body sort of approach. And then from the 1930s onwards, you have the rebirth of witchcraft in the form of Wicca with Gerald Gardner, almost as like the kind of cultural counterbalance, which is about darkness, the feminine, about practical magic. So it's like that equation, Warren, when you're saying, if we lean one way, we're going to have to counterbalance, aren't we? And often it's like that in our lives. If we get too floaty and we're disappearing off into space, sometimes we need something that's going to bring us back to our body and reality as well.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It is kind of very the daytime, light time, the Virgin Mary, Black Madonna, Mary Magdalene, whatever, these different elements coming in.
I have a book of, it's very interesting, a book of Buddhist chanting. You must have attended this in the past, have you? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a vibration there, and the same with Sama Arhang, to concentrate, bring the mind to focus. There's a vibration there.
Yeah.
But the Buddhist chanting, just when I'm sitting there, and I have to read the words, but it's non-stop. It's without taking a break. It gets this energy going.
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating subject.
I attend things occasionally at the World Teachers Trust. The current guru there, master there is Master KPK, but he talks about this need to vibrate.
Yeah.
And how the Sanskrit mantras need to be vibrated. in order to internalize and get the energy moving. And
You see, the interesting thing about vibration frequency, I have to use that in my profession when one of the things when you're designing gas turbine engines, the turbine blades, they have a resonant frequency, and they can be excited by an input, an energy input, and vice versa, and the higher the frequency, it means the higher the energy input. So eventually you get to a frequency where the theory is it becomes invisible in a way. It's moving so fast you can't see it, and this is a very high energy input, very high frequency. And so I often wondered, how do you change a frequency? Well, if you take that pen, for example, and you support it like that, that's simple supported, and that has a natural frequency in that condition. And the way you change that natural resonant frequency is if you can make it, instead of made out of wood, you make it steel, because it becomes stiffer, and therefore the frequency goes higher. If you change the boundary conditions and you clamp it, you get a higher frequency. So you can change the material and you can change the boundary conditions. And I'm wondering about the human body. Because people talk about high frequency, higher energy foods, you're changing your DNA to a higher frequency. And if you're bringing it lower, you're eating animals. This is one of the theories, because the animals are a lower consciousness level or lower frequency level. So what you do, and apparently the human body is 62 hertz. Now, if you're ill with bacteria infection, it will go down to 54. Anything below that, and you're dead. So the lower, bacteria has a lower consciousness level, and therefore you get a compromise. In engineering terms, it'd be called a composite. And so all this makes sense to me on the frequency, and when you connect it with biology. And I've got a paper I published on trees, the frequency of trees, how they in a hurricane defined storm, which is 33 meters a second, spruce trees have a certain frequency, and as you get to a higher energy input from the storm, eventually energy will break the tree at a certain frequency. It's called short fatigue life. So it's just a fascinating subject, and we must, because we are the same material. What's in the ground here, we have a natural frequency. Well, we know that. So this massive subject. I mean, you're dealing in spiritual matters. Steve and you, Pamela, have done a lot of this, and the frequency, how it affects us. It's fascinating. I like to put mathematics to it. I'm sure. I think it's 1 over frequency times the square root of 1/2 pi r, or something like that. But anyway,
lots of stuff.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
So kind of building on those two, building on both, as you said, the sensitivity to frequency there, and building on sacred space of the porter and the lector. The next order is that of the exorcist. And this is one that we get, that as a Gnostic priest and bishop, I've had more interest in, for people who tell me, I want to become an exorcist, and so far, none of them have really stood up from, okay, aside from the movies, what do you expect to do with this? What you've seen in the movies, is that what you're thinking here? Yeah. But as I was thinking about this, kind of in this idea of both kind of going into the depthness, thinking about shamanic journeying, soul journeying as really part of this. When I was, even one thing that came up when I've been studying past life regression is that these groups would also teach clearing spirit attachments, detecting spirit attachments, and of course, clearing subtle energies. And all of this are things that really kind of roll into kind of a modern take of really what the exorcist is, or could be. Yeah. Yeah, I have friends who supplement their living, clearing houses and such. Yeah.
I think also part of any kind of healing work, and I certainly speak as a therapist, is helping people name things that are hidden or have been lost or they can't speak about. And often those are acts of exorcism so that they can externalize them in order to integrate them back in a more kind of whole way. So I think it's a much more subtle model of exorcism rather than being kind of a very dualistic sort of, I'm good and these evil things are infesting me. I think I'm always cautious about St. Paul's discern the spirits. You know, we have to be really careful about, because I think when people are suffering, they want to demonize aspects of themselves. And actually what we need to do is help them name and reintegrate what they're struggling with. And that's a subtler kind of exorcism. It's a subtler kind of work.
Well, Steve, how did that work? A couple of months ago, we had in Ireland a very interesting exorcism where some bishops walked through the streets to the council's office and did exorcism on the local authority to cast out evil. Now, they didn't want to be exorcised, I'm sure, but they got it for free. You know, I think it's a very good protest technique, really, to go to your local council. And there's one here in London now. I've often thought I'll go out there and exercise the place and see what happens. You probably get yeah. I need more than me. I need a team of people.
Well, yeah, and you've got to be careful when you're exercising council property that you're not projecting your own demons onto other people. You know, so you know what you're protesting against is actually what you're struggling with in your own life. Often, dare I say.
Yes, I suppose.
But people in glass houses shouldn't exercise other people. That's what I'm saying.
That's a very good, that's a new expression. We should write that one down.
Yeah.
People in glass houses don't exercise other people. A good one.
So, of course, the next step then, so I think this is kind of clear from where we're talking with the exorcist here. And again, this is a full workshop thing itself, and priests and other groups need to know this as well. But if you don't know how to create sacred space, you're not going to know really how to recognize and clear. Then the final, the minor orders, as we typically do, is the acolytes. So as I was thinking about this, actually this image came to mind. And maybe this is because I was looking at the Celtic book that spends their time calling the quarters and then works with the telluric current, pulling up from the earth, going down to the earth, and then the acolyte going up. The idea of a descension, before you can ascend, you have to descend. And so the acolyte itself, when you get into a working church, the acolyte has a lot to do. It's a busy, it's a busy person within the regular Eucharist ceremony. But if we think about minor orders, and minor orders as like a stepping stone for an individual who doesn't have access to incorporating into a working church, you know, what could be done? And this is where, I don't know, in my own mind, thinking that this is maybe the place for starting to work on meditation, ascension, candle work, and, again, vibrational work, purification, these sorts of these sorts of plans before really getting into the sacramental. And
on that list, on this acolyte list, the preparation before the sacramental, before the ritual, these are just headlines, for
yeah.
example. I mean, they could be expanded upon, like you
Oh
suggest.
yeah.
Do you have any documentation that expands upon that progression?
Yeah, I have within the preparation and the assistance, I think it's within the ceremony itself. I also think that it's partly there in the in the initiation rites for the acolyte. And then it's kind of embedded in the rubrics, and I think it may actually be in some of these other documents. I think it's in the old Athena Theologica of part of what the duties of the acolyte is within the regular service. They light the candles. Of course, there is a system by how the candles should be lit. There are prayers the acolyte should say before lighting the candles, or they should at least pray before lighting the candles. They also get involved with doing some of the sensing, and then also helping because the acolyte is the only minor order that's really usually allowed up around the communion table. So they're the ones that's responsible for bringing out the lavado, for the priests and deacons to wash their hands. They're the ones who have to bring out the cruets, and put these things away. They're the ones who have to help with the oblation when things are cleaning up. So, and I think because we historically have moved people through the minor orders fairly quickly, into the acolyte. The acolyte is there's often only just one acolyte and having to do a lot of work. Yeah.
I noticed that Robert was a very good acolyte.
Robert had been an altar boy back in his pre-Taoist days as a youngster.
Back in his pre-DJ, he's more like a DJ now, I've noticed.
Yes. So this is kind of a quick run through of these orders. This is my diagram for that. We had been talking about, we talked about a little bit about this earlier on this year, of how this might work, and different orders that are typically there within a monastic group. Now I noticed in that old Catholic, I think in that old Catholic document you shared, they put subdeacon down in the minor orders. Is that right? Let's look at what that is.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I think they were. I think they were just seeing it as the minor orders as preparation for the clerical orders, rather than being a thing unto themselves. Because I've read other documents related to the liberal Catholic tradition, Pam, where acolyte is kind of like, you could just pause at acolyte and not go on to subdeacon at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because subdeacon was very much seen as being directly linked to the clerical orders, and subdeacon would often be quite brief before becoming a deacon.
I think that's how we've always used it, and I think because in a lot of, there's a potential for a lot of work being done at the deacon level. The deacon can essentially do almost everything a priest can do, aside from creating minor orders, and then aside from actually consecrating the host and the wine during Eucharist. Everything else the deacon can do. Deacon reads the Gospels. The deacon can administer Eucharist for elements that have already been consecrated. So in a large church, it may be the deacon that's going out to administer the sacraments to people who are sick or infirmed. So in that scenario, you can see why there might be a lot for a subdeacon to learn. Many places a deacon would be in charge of actually doing a lot of the training and the teaching of the catechumens who are trying to become active and maybe have yet to be confirmed or baptized. So the or here is the people who are interested but not quite completely involved, their training is allotted to the deacon. Meanwhile, the training of the minor orders is typically allotted to the priest. And then the training of any priests is under the bishop. But so there could be a lot in a large church for a deacon to do. Deacons baptize as well.
This brings up a question. We had a guy in Northern Ireland who's interested in being ordained. Neil House. Yeah,
Neil House. He was one of them I had neglected. He was on my email list for this past week that didn't get emailed. He's been included in all these emails, but as far as a personal follow-up.
In the Gnostic Cafe, I haven't heard from Neil for a long time. He's gone very quiet, and he hasn't appeared on here either.
Yeah, he needs a little bit of a follow-up, I would say, and give him a.
I might telephone Neil and see. There's a few other people who have invited, but they haven't turned up, and they should do.
Yeah.
Anyway, we keep trying.
Keep trying. See what we do.
Yeah, but I do think it does raise the question, and I think because I think we've talked about this before, but there's been a cultural tendency within Gnostic churches and within the independent sacramental movement generally of all clergy and no laity. Everyone's ordained and nobody's just coming to the group because and I suppose I'm always cautious about folks, because I know Rosamond Miller, you were talking about Rosamond Miller, Warren, she says if she wouldn't ordain someone a priest until they've been in at her church helping at her altar for a couple of years. And I think I think what do people think they're getting if they just want to get ordained and then they just disappear? It's like, what do they think that's about?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think they've got to get over the vanity, the ego side of this. To have a label put on you because that's what you want. It's not a true label if you just disappear with it. And this is one of the concerns that Stephen Holler has. He won't ordain anybody for, I think it's 7 or 9 years. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. You get your PhD quicker, you can get ordained by Stephen.
But I think that was because of Stephen's experience with Rosamond.
Yeah.
So you've got to be like your committee, Steve. You've got so many years' experience behind you doing this spiritual work, this following, this learning, and you realise, like we all do, it's not just there's an experiential side to this as well as an understanding, a reading to start with. I think it starts with initially faith, which goes into belief, which goes into knowledge, gathering more knowledge, and then understanding, assimilating that, and then you realize just because we can't see it, it doesn't mean say it's not there. It goes deeper. It's just a lifelong thing. I mean, I come across people, and this is what I wonder about with Neil. He is he is a Christian. He goes to church a lot. He told me, but he's got Gnostic tendencies, strong ones. But he just disappears. And there's many people like that on my Gnostic cafe. There's 50 people there, and I hear from one or two. A guy called Lewis. He has got a very deep understanding, spiritual understanding. Some people, like you, Steve, have the capability of putting the invisible into words. Lewis is one of those guys who can express it. The same with Stephen Holler, you know. So it's not short-termism. I think we have to be aware of that. You know, I'm striving all the time. I know Pamela is as well, because you never stop, do you? You know,
I know.
you're striving for more knowledge that takes us closer to divinity, you know.
Warren, Pam and I were talking about pseudo Dionysus, and we were talking, and you know, in his schema, Pam was highlighting that the monk is higher than the bishop, and I think what that means is that the beyond the office or beyond the title or whichever hat you're wearing, your identity has to be as a spiritual practitioner and someone who is placing themselves within the alchemical crucible of spiritual work, you know. So, and everything else without that means nothing, doesn't it? You know, unless you're willing to let yourself be transformed by this stuff, what is it? It's just game playing.
Yeah. And I think the whole thing, like Dionysus, where he saw, he saw the priest as just being there to kind of teach, the deacon help the priest, and then the bishop for administrative control, but that the real spirituality was there in the monks. And I think of the Celtic spirituality. You read about the Celtic saints, and you get the impression that most of these Celtic saints were at the level of monk / priest, something sort of quasi thing like that. And then they had to be almost forced, like St. Cuthbert. It took 3 different times until they came there in person in Lindisfarne and almost drug him down to Whitby to make him a bishop, because he was perfectly happy where he was and didn't want the hassle.
Well, I think I said, Pam, St. Francis only was made a deacon at the end of his life because everyone else was a bit embarrassed and they felt he should legitimize their order by taking a holy order. But he said, I don't want to become a priest, just make me a deacon then if you have to do something, you know, like that, you know.
Yeah.
We have a very well-known priest around here. He's not a priest. He is a priest, but there's a special name. He lives alone, never been married. He was a teacher. He's nearly 80 years old. Now, Father Daniel is Celtic. He speaks Welsh. He's a Russian Orthodox priest in Blaenau-Ffestiniog. And we go there on a Sunday. And my wife, you know, she's Russian Orthodox. Now, she was telling me stories. He's very well known. And I was sitting in his garden with him the other week on a Sunday after Mass. We have a tea and biscuits. And he told me that Prince Charles flew in a few years ago. I said, really? He said they parked the helicopter 3 miles down the road in the hills, and they drove, and the car came for him and drove him to this. Now he's got a house church as well as his own church. So when he bought this corner house, it was a shop 20 years ago, or maybe more. But everybody in the village knows him, you know, Father Daniel, and he looks like Merlin the wizard. He's got this long white pointed. I've only seen him in this Merlin outfit, you know, but he's got a power. This guy has got a power. We talk about vibration. Tanya was telling me how, I don't know when this was, but he invoked something that was so powerful in that church. I mean, you're in there for 3 hours, and he brought it down. And she said, I felt the power. And you know, she goes to church a lot. She used to go to one in Manchester, but this guy, Father Daniel, last week we had Ludmilla come over. She's Russian Orthodox. She's been here, I don't know, 50 years, and she heard of him 50 years ago. And when she found out this was the guy she heard of, or 40 years ago, she was really excited. And last Sunday, they both went down there and had this experience. Father Daniel, I wish I could absorb his knowledge, you know. You know what I mean, Pamela, Steve? That he's got the techniques how he can bring it all on, you know. Fascinating. Do you know, I think, to me, the way I think about him, or anybody who's got that power, like a conductor of an orchestra, he's bringing it there and getting to do that and bringing it down, and he's got this capability, you know. I don't know if you could explain that to me.
Yeah, but they get out of the way. That's the point, Warren. They get out of the way so that can come through. You know, it's like channeling, isn't it? It's like in voodoo, like a possession state. It's allowing, not only is he immersed in his spiritual tradition for that many decades, and so it's part of his DNA, when he's at the altar or whatever, he can just get out of the way and then it just comes through.
Amazing. Do you get this experience yourself, Steve? I'm not being cheeky at all, but I mean, I know you've been, do you feel that yourself? What do you get out of the way?
I would say at times, I would say at times, but and actually, do you know what, in therapy sometimes I feel like something's getting done that I don't have a lot to do with, you know. It's you know, because if you can tune in, I think it's about tuning in, isn't it? And I think a lot of these processes we've been talking about today, like purification, creating sacred space, vibrating names, being in the body, noticing the breath, these are all ways of tuning in to prepare for that, allowing the divine presence, however we understand that, to come through.
I think the divine presence come through with Dina. Dina, reveal your secret to me, please. You've got something going on there. Something's coming through here.
Well, some as the Tao, as it says in the Tao Te Ching, Warren, you know, those who know don't necessarily speak.
Yes, true. We need to tell that to Robert, because he does speak, and he communicates very well with me, you know. But I know what you mean. It's very true. Yeah. So I assume, Dina, you know.
Thank you for that, Pam. I'm aware that my clock's ticking and I need to get away, but thank you very much.
Clock is ticking, but yeah.
Thank you for that presentation. It was really helpful.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, I have to go, Pam, as well. I'm doing some work on the church on the floor at the moment. I'm working clothes, and so, but that was wonderful. I hope we can see this as a video. You publish it will at some point.
Yeah, I'll be doing that.
And Pam, is the plan to do the clerical orders next?
Yeah, I think we might as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And look at some of the things that are actually involved with them and that.
That'd be great.
And I'm going to continue to think about, you know, I think next time I'll share a little bit more of what we had historically for the training, and why I think a new approach is completely needed.
Great. I look forward to that. That sounds exciting.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dinah.
Bye. Bye, Dinah.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Bye.